So 2.0 has been out for actually almost exactly 2 weeks now. It's been a pretty revolutionary patch. This is probably, no, actually, I can say definitively, this is my favorite fighting game I've ever played. And if you've seen any of my tweets or discussion about it, you probably already knew that. I'm just making a video that goes into more depth about the things that I do like, my thoughts on the state of the balance, the game, the system mechanics. I'm going to be getting into all that. So I'll just start with the system changes. So first of all, one is the combo changes. If you don't really know, the long and short of it is that if you start with a bigger button, you'll do more damage, but your max damage has gone down pretty much universally. I think that's the case for every character. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But basically, your starter matters a lot more, and there's more reason to take short combos into hard knockdown now instead of just maxing Juggle Decay. Because if you remember watching 1.0, that was pretty much all the top-level players did. With some exceptions, but for the most part, hard knockdown is more universally desirable. And that's good because it's adding a lot more combo variety to characters. Makes the meter economy a lot more interesting than it was in 1.0. Kind of helps with the problem that 1.0 had, where the characters who had win conditions tied to their level 2, like Oleander and Arizona, were put in a much stronger place than the others, just system. It's a really good change. A side effect of it as well is that we get bigger punishes on basically everything. So when your opponent messes up, you can punish them harder for it, and I think that's just going to up the level of play, encourage much cleaner play from the community. The other big change to the system was the pre-block change. And if you don't know how pre-block works, basically if you try to jump, or specifically if you try to up back and they do a low normal, the range of where that low normal will glue you to the ground and hit you low has been significantly increased. This makes up-backing and chicken blocking a lot riskier than it used to be. Being in the air is still really good, that hasn't changed from 1.0. But the difference now is that it's harder for you to get onto that safely. It's just been really nice because now people who leaned on up-back really hard can't get to it as easily. It's sped up the pace of matches somewhat. There's a lot less timeouts this version for the most part, mostly because people can't spend as much time stalling in the air when they have the life lead. And that's been a really big change that I think has been primarily for the positive. And the last one I want to talk about is the input buffer and instant block change. So if you don't know what that's like, instant block was always good. It was always in this game, but now there is a more clear visual indicator when you instant block. And if you're not familiar with how it works in this game, it's the same as in BlazBlue Central Fiction for the most part, where it takes off 3 frames of block stuns and minimizes the pushback. We're starting to see players use instant block more just because of the visual changes. It's now more obvious when someone instant blocks, there's more layers that can develop around it on defense and offense. Ultimately, it's a change that is making people realize they have more control of the offensive and defensive tempo that they didn't have in 1.0, or at least it wasn't as obvious. And I really like that change. And the input buffer is kind of in the same boat, where it's not really a big system change. It is changing the way people are playing and structuring their pressure, but it's basically putting us at a higher level of play faster, because now we can punish stuff harder. Stuff like Oleander 2-2D, which was infamously hard to punish because of the weird block stun time, is now universally punishable with a B normal, and it's not particularly hard to land. Staggers are still good. They're actually arguably better. It's just you don't leave as big of a stagger window. You're trying to make pressure strings with more 1-frame, 2-frame gaps, really small delays that if the opponent is mashing, they'll hang themselves. And it's changed a lot of dynamics on pressure, and it's just a really good change. It's actually probably the best change that this patch has made, if you ask me. Like, if there was one thing I wanted in 1.0, that was probably the biggest one. And it's a pretty generous buffer window. I think it's 4 frames. Someone would have to look into it to tell me if that's exact, but it's super noticeable, and it makes the entire game feel so much better to play. Yeah, system change is really good. There's a couple other things I don't really care for, but I'm going to save that for the end. So now I'm going to talk about the characters. I'll start with Shandy. So Shandy is really good. Her pressure style is actually kind of unique in this game in that she has much longer turns, and she's really fuzzy oriented. It's interesting because she's not really a character you can push block out that easily, but she's still incentivizing you to push block because it's usually the safest way to play around her fuzzy offense. And she's just making for a really interesting character. Her damage is really high, her throw bait game is phenomenal, and her mid-range is good too. Like, a lot of people are sleeping on that character's neutral. She has great air-to-airs. Her mid-range presence is actually pretty threatening, because 2B is the kind of normal it is. If you come from BB, it's basically Izanami 2B, but better, which I didn't even know was possible. And yeah, she's just like a pretty solid character. She does have some weaknesses in neutral, and then she can't play the vertical neutral as well. And on offense, even though her turns are long and her staggers are really good, and her mix is really good because of the fuzzies, she does build the opponent a lot of meter and gives them more chances to cross-canner, which is something that she does need to commit a little bit harder to bait, just because it requires her to give magic. Additionally, her defensive options are kind of sketchy. Her level 1 super is really good. It's like an invincible Hotenjin. It's like a 5-frame anti-air super, and it actually goes into a combo and restands if you spend the 2 bars. But that's the only defensive tool she has. She's kind of lacking in terms of anti-airs, but like I said, her air-to-airs sort of make up for it most cases, so it's not really. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, Shanty's really good. I don't want to say anything definitive about the balance, but I'm definitely leaning towards her being a really strong character in the game right now. I think we're going to see her a lot. And then for the other characters who are already in the game, because they're not new, Arizona hasn't really changed a whole lot in terms of her toolkit. There were bug fixes to her, so Deadbuck's not a thing. Her max damage went down a lot, but she also plays the HKD reset game very well, so that's probably just going to be the way people play her. But her stuff that was really good before, like the JC, Stomp Rope Pressure, her neutral tools, like mid-range, those are all pretty much the same, and they're really strong. And yeah, I think she's going to be, like, she's still going to get played. A lot of Arizona mains are leaning to Shanty right now just because she has some similarities, and, you know, Shanty is all new. But Arizona is looking to be really good character. That's all there is. Like, she just hasn't changed a whole lot. She actually fits the system meta maybe a little bit more, depending on who you ask. Now, Oleander got changed the most. I'm really happy with how they handled her as someone who's not an Oleander player, because they gave her more to do on her own. With 6B, which even though it's kind of whatever as a normal, it does give her more layers and pressure. There's a really interesting set of offensive layers you can play off of block 6B, because there's the fireball cancels and got the trap to be plus if they don't IB it. It actually puts you really close. She moves, all her normals move her closer now, so you can't just kind of push block her mindlessly and push her to the corner as easily. So honestly, in my opinion, she might have actually gotten a bit stronger as a character overall. But the power level of the game right now is a lot higher, and it is kind of seeming like she's on the weaker end from a first glance. It looks like she's also having, or she's struggling more versus characters that she wasn't as much in 1.0 debatably. But overall, like, she's still Oleander. Fred is still ridiculous. They actually buffed a lot of aspects of Fred. But it is harder to just get Fred out now. You're not guaranteed it because the system doesn't really play in your favor as much. But yeah, I'm just really happy with how they handled her. I'm glad they didn't gut her. I'm glad she's still making people upset. That's always fun. But she's looking like a much more interesting and actually more stable character than she was before, which is good. That's kind of what I want. Velvet. Right now, I think Velvet is one of the big winners of this patch, and all they did was touch her numbers and like a couple other hitboxes. Like the 5C buff is really big. I know as a Tan player, that's definitely changed some things in the matchup. I know Velvet players like it. She chips you out a lot harder, so you don't have as much time to just close distance against Velvet. Like, you're gonna be down health as much, or more. She's hitting harder. She actually has some of the highest damage starters in the game right now, and her punish game is super good. Like, Velvet is looking to be a really strong character this patch. Her matchup spread looks pretty okay too at a glance. I know she has some problems against Shanty. Tien's definitely still pretty good against her, but she's already had a pretty threatening tournament presence as well, so we're probably going to see a lot as time goes on. She definitely got stronger. Palm is kind of interesting. I've actually been playing her a little more seriously this patch, and I always kind of subbed her in 1.0, sort of jokingly, but I always like playing her. The system changes definitely work in her favor. Basically what they did with her is they made Mama Dog a bit stronger, and they made it so Airbud's not as good, but Bitey is a lot better. Bitey is a lot harder to get rid of in neutral, because his hurt box is shifted now when he's active. So her neutral has, I don't really want to say definitively if it's gotten better, but definitely towards the end of 1.0, people were getting really comfortable playing against Airbud. He didn't seem to have the presence that he did before. So him getting nerfed was not possibly not a big change for what the in-game meta with her is going to look like. Bitey, though, is looking really good. She was already playing really HKD oriented in 1.0, so this patch benefits her. The damage on multi-hit starters definitely benefits her because it makes JB starters, or sorry, her IAD JB starters a lot scarier. Her max damage to get gutted, but like I said, it's universal. She's another character that I think is just looking really strong. She's always been one of the lesser played characters, I think, because she's hard, and her toolkit's not really intuitive to use. Palm player skill sets tend to be very lopsided, which I don't think is a controversial statement. I think most people would agree with that notion. I think she's going to develop really interesting this patch. I was already in the end up thinking she was super strong in 1.0. I really liked her, and I think she's going to continue to be strong this patch as well. Paprika got a completely new move. She got Kagura's BFAF from BlazBlue. It's also a hard knockdown. Paprika already was making those same decisions in 1.0, just regarding reset or hard knockdown versus just max out. And I think her hard knockdown game is really good. The pre-block changes definitely help her out a lot. It's because it's just harder to up back in general, and that was something that she couldn't stop as easily before. Yeah, and she still hits hard. The JD changes definitely help her because when she lands like a JC starter from across up mid-screen, you just get deleted. Kind of a side effect also I wanted to say is that low health characters this patch, like, you're definitely feeling that weakness a lot more. And I think that that's really interesting. That wasn't really something that I thought about as much in 1.0 as I am this patch. And now Tian. I have the most to say about her because I played her. So Tian is interesting because she definitely lost a lot of good things that she had in 1.0. Like flight got nerfed, so she can't do as tight flight pressure. Being in the air is still good, but it's a little bit harder in this patch just in general. Because there's not as many timeouts and because everyone's hitting a bit harder off an average starter than they were before, having low health matters more. But she also got Volcanic Dash. And Volcanic Dash is an interesting tool. It's a really good pressure reset, not as good in the way of mix-up. I've actually been messing around with it a lot the past couple of days, and it's definitely actually covering a weakness she had in neutral before, where before if Tian landed like a max range 5B and it got push blocked, there wasn't really anything you could do about that. But now for a bar of magic, you're getting in off that, and that's something she didn't have before. So I'd definitely say her neutral actually probably got better. And also the level 2 changes. Level 2 stuff is a lot more viable. In 1.0, it was not viable to go into level 2, besides some very specific scenarios. And in this patch, it's so much more viable to go into it. Her punish game is better. You can decimate people in level 2 with the right starter because of Ash loops. She has like really good magic generation now that wasn't there before because of Volcanic Dash, which we just found out you can combo into. Because of the refund on that, it's a really good tool. Overall, like Tian, she's still Tian. The way I was playing her in 1.0 hasn't really gotten changed, so I think I'm feeling the change is the least out of most of the Tian player base. She did lose some safe jump stuff because of the old flight height, which was probably what was going to be favored in 1.0 had the game had more time to develop. That stuff has been changed and doesn't necessarily work as consistently. And she's still taking soft knockdown a lot, which is something I'm going to get into in a bit, because that's actually sort of a weakness if your character has to choose a soft knockdown more in the current patch. Anyway, Tian's definitely still good. She's still Tianhuo. She does all the Tianhuo things that she did. It's just easier to get out of pressure now. And she's just good. I think other characters probably got more than she did. I think she might be kind of in the same place as Oleander, where she got stronger overall with what she's able to do now, but also the power level of the game went up. So even though she's really good, she may not be as like strong relative to other characters of the game. But I think that's okay because what she does is effective and it's very safe. She's always been like the most stable character in this game, and I don't think that's changed at all. Now, I've said a lot of things. Whether or not you agree with them, I really like this patch. But there are just a couple things that I am concerned about, not necessarily because they're problems now, but because in the long term, it's hard for me to imagine what this is going to look like. My first big concern is with a change that actually wasn't in the patch notes at first, and that is the additional throw whiff recovery. If you missed this when you first read the patch notes, it's because they forgot to put it in. They added it later. Basically, throws have 5 more frames of whiff recovery right now, and I'm not really sure how I feel about that. I would say I'm kind of on the more negative vibe, or on the more negative side of it. The main reason being is because now it's even more punishing to try to throw rolls. So if you're playing a character who's taking soft knockdown more often, dealing with throws is just a little bit more frustrating, and you can get punished for it a lot more. Additionally, the situations where like the attacker whiffs a throw and then the defender whiffs a throw because they're trying to press throw, those situations actually got worse because now you can super punish the defender for pressing that in response. And that situation already felt really, really bad in 1.0, and I think it feels even worse this version. And additionally, I think that throws are going to end up being higher risk just in general. But you could also argue, and this is kind of the counter-argument to my feeling on them, that because the game is more hard knockdown-oriented, you can avoid the soft knockdown problems in the first place. And additionally, throws do more damage now universally, just because they apply the first hit starter bonus, which is universally higher in this version of the game. So you could argue it's a bit of a trade-off, and maybe it won't look as bad in the long run. Right now, though, I think it might be my least favorite change that they've made in this version of the game. But I need to do more research. Obviously, it's still week 1, but that's something that sends a bad feeling to my gut for sure. The other concern is actually something that hasn't really changed at all, is cross canter. Cross canter was already really, really good in 1.0. And I'm not really thinking about it as a defensive tool either. Cross canter, and I know other players have shared this same opinion with me. Cross canter has always been sort of a good offensive tool for getting your momentum back after you lose your turn in the corner and you're blocking something. And the thing about cross canter, and I actually even made a whole video about how to deal with it, cross canter is just really high reward for landing it, for how hard it is to punish. And if you're a character that can't do something in response to it when you're looking for it, that makes it a lot harder. Because even if you do like a 2A, if they cross canter early enough, you won't necessarily recover in time to block the cross canter that comes out of it. If you're playing a character like Velvet or Tian, dealing with it's not really as big of a deal because you have something you can do in response to it as long as you're not already committed to the next Gatling in your string. But for characters that can't deal with it, I think this is a big deal. And not to mention, cross canter it's pretty cheap. Like half a bar for most characters isn't really that expensive, and especially because we're starting to see people IB more thanks to the changes, that meter is more readily available. So that's something that I think might need to be touched later on. I don't really know how you would solve it. I definitely think the fact it does a lot of damage is pretty weird. And I don't know, cross canter is just something that leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I feel like when we develop this patch more, it's gonna jump out as a more problematic mechanic. On the flip side, though, you could argue that we can punish it harder than we ever could before, because like I said, counter hit starters and like first hit starters are so much more valuable than they were before. So you can blow it up a lot harder if you're reading it, or if just your opponent is throwing it out carelessly, like after a jump in and you can just hold back to bait it, you can punish it more. So I don't know. And then all the quality of life stuff, I've already mentioned the gameplay ones, but even stuff like the replays, which is actually what you're looking at now. This is probably the coolest replay system I've ever seen in a fighting game. It's also really nice how easily you can share them with other people just through files. Some of the training mode cleanups, like being able to raise the juggle decay faster, all that stuff is so good. This patch is so full of polish and attention. It's like so clear that these people are listening to their community and want us to just enjoy the game as much as possible. This has been probably the most fun I've had with any fighting game over the course of the last 2 weeks, because this patch is just that good. Anyway, that was a bit long. Those were all my thoughts on 2.0. So far, I'm probably going to make another video in maybe like 6 months or so, just so we can see how wrong this was or how correct I was about the direction the game is going to go. See what develops. You know, stuff is always changing. We're always finding new things. Characters have a lot of new tools to play with, so it's a jam. Thank you for listening.